Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to our very first session of Canva's Design for Change Week. My name is Enza. I will be hosting our session today. And in this session, we're joined by Nick Belshaw, one of our brand designers here at Canva. And Nick will be giving an introduction to designing for change. It's a great presentation, and I know you'll find value in all the useful information that Nick will share with us. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Nick to begin.
Hi, everybody. So great to be here. It's a little odd delivering a sizable seminar to an empty room, but yes, very much looking forward to kicking off a week of really great content. So this is the first in a series of design skills workshops, and hopefully you'll get some really useful information out of it for your business or for your nonprofit. So just to let you know, a little bit of housekeeping, we're being recorded. So of course, if you want to relive the workshop after, or if you want to share it with some friends, we will absolutely be posting this recording on our nonprofit page, and you can go and access it there. We've been inundated with Canva love. We launched this project a little while ago, and we've had a huge outpouring, big response. In fact, almost 6,000 people registered for this webinar alone. So we're really, really grateful for you guys joining and coming to watch the content for the week. And just to let you know, obviously with such a huge number of you, it's a little hard for us to answer everybody's questions, but we'll do our best. So there is a Q&A in the webinar if you want to ask a question, and throughout the talk here, Enza and I will hopefully answer some of your questions, and we'll have a little bit of time at the end as well. You can also join our community on Facebook, a nonprofit community. This is a really great place to connect with other nonprofit business owners and people who are part of social impact organizations. So if you have questions or you want to share what you're working on, please jump onto that community and you can connect with people there, including our team. So just a little about me. I'm Nick. I'm a brand designer here at Canva. I've worked in brand strategy and brand design for a number of years before joining Canva. And I work specifically on a platform called Design School, which is a really great place for you to learn about design specialties across lots of different different subjects, and also how to leverage Canva as a design tool. A little bit about what we're going to be covering off today. So we're going to do a short intro into Canva. A lot of you hopefully already know a bit about us. I'll give you a little bit of context for why this week is so important to us, and it's a real passion project for what we do here. We're going to jump into some purpose and values for your brand and your business. Then we're going to look at brand design and some design principles for how to start to bring together some of those brand assets for your business, whether you already have a business that exists and you're looking to refine it, or you've just got an idea and you need a little bit of help to start that brand. Then we'll finish with a style guide. So by the end of today, you should be able to walk away from this session with a useful document to help you go forward and start to create marketing materials and establish your brand. So hopefully it's a very practical session. You'll get something very tangible at the end that you can walk away with. So a little bit about us. So Canva is been around for about 7 years now. Our mission really is to empower the whole world to design. Whether you are 8 years old or 80 years old, we think we are the right design tool for you. And what that really means is design for everyone. And we're a very inclusive design platform. We actually have a whole bunch of different products specifically for professional users, for education users, for enterprise users, and now, of course, non-profit users as well. We have over 50,000 non-profits using our platform at the moment, and that's something we give away completely for free. We really believe in empowering organizations who have, trying to make a real difference in the world. So social impact work, non-profit organizations, we've been involved with quite a lot of big campaigns and supporting a lot of big movements all around the world. This is just some of the stuff we've done. So we have supported, movements like the Global Climate Strike, Earth Day Live, which was a completely digital event, the recent Black Lives Matter protests, and also something a little bit closer to home, which I'm just going to share a short video with you now, which is the Kids Off Nauru campaign. So I'll just flick it over to one of my colleagues here, and hopefully we can watch a short video.
On a small Pacific island called Nauru, a humanitarian crisis had developed. The Australian government's policy of indefinite detention led to some 650 refugees, over 100 children, being detained on a tiny island. The situation had really reached a crisis point where something had to be done or there were going to be deaths. And so we knew that if we let the Australian public know what was happening, people would get involved, people would be forced to act. We were able to build a comprehensive brand kit in Canva that allowed the entire organisation and anyone around the world to pick up these designs and create something beautiful and something that matched perfectly with the campaign, so that all of Australia spoke with one voice with this brand, and it just had this amazing visual presence out there in the world. The children on Nauru received widespread international media coverage from CNN, Today and Al Jazeera.
Claire, you've got 92 days to get these kids off Nauru if the campaign is to meet its goals.
Australia must act now.
And we received support from an amazing range of celebrities like Russell Crowe, Hugh Jackman and the Wiggles, which was amazing in bringing together even more support for our cause. By Universal Children's Day, 102 of the 119 children were moved from the island of Nauru.
Australia is on track to remove all asylum seeker children held on Nauru within weeks.
And by Christmas, the Australian government had moved all of the children and their families off the island of Nauru. So by setting up all of the graphics in Canva, we created an incredibly shareable set of assets that every ordinary Australian could pick up and use to become part of the movement. It's an incredibly powerful tool for nonprofits because it allows you to get every hand on deck creating graphics for your movement, and it allows you to become a truly democratic movement. It allows you to become truly grassroots and to allow everyone in the world to be a part of making change.
Yes, that's Sally. She's one of our product designers here at Canva. And I think it really speaks to the power of using a democratic graphic design platform to really help amplify your movement and your cause. But before we get on to things like campaigns, I think we really need to answer some more fundamental questions. So what is branding for nonprofits? Well, I think rather than answer this question, we could probably simplify it a little more and just ask, what is a brand? Because I think a brand for nonprofits is just the same as every other brand. It's all about creating a vehicle for communication. So we're going to hear from James Gilmore now. He's a branding expert here in Sydney, and we'll see what he has to say.
I think for me it is a connected set of behaviours. So it's how I speak, it's how I communicate with others, it's how I promote myself, it's how I react. When something goes wrong, what do I do to fix it? When you have a problem, how am I there? And in that sense, a brand is a very human thing. It's very amorphous, and more it needs to move into very different places of our life. So it might be how you talk to something like an Alexa, or the way that a text is worded from your phone company, or an advert you see on the street. It's all of those things.
So I think what James is really getting at here is that a brand is this ever-evolving, growing thing. And of course, it does encapsulate a lot of the typical touch points that you might think of, like a logo, a graphic system, layout, things like tone of voice, so that maybe the way you speak to your users or your customers. But beyond that, I think a good way to think of it is it's a promise to your customers or to your audience. So it's the associations and experiences that people have when they think of your brand. or your organization. So today we have, I've set up a little workbook here to for those who want to kind of follow along at home. So you can type this link into a separate tab in your browser, and it should pull up a workbook, which we're going to work through throughout this workshop. And there's an opportunity there to start to build out a style guide and your strategy and a few different things. All right, so this is really what we're trying to create today. We want to come away with something like this, which is a really basic style guide. So this is really like a single source of truth, which contains all of your brand assets in one place for you to then go away and create your marketing materials. So here this is one I've created earlier for a imaginary music streaming brand, Soundscaper. So we've got a color palette, we've got some photography, we've got typography, and of course we've got a logo as well. And we're going to create all of these, or you're going to create all of these for yourself today. So where do we begin? Probably the most important and central part of establishing a new brand is figuring out what your purpose is and getting very clear with it. This is really the hub from which everything else radiates out from. And without getting this right, obviously, it means everything else won't quite fall into place the way that you'd hoped. So just to illustrate this a little bit more, we're going to hear from another speaker here, Simon Sinek. Some of you might have heard of him. He's an author from the United States, and we'll see what he has to say.
Why, how, what? This little idea explains why some organizations and some leaders are able to inspire where others aren't. Let me define the terms really quickly. Every single person, every single organization on the planet knows what they do, 100%. Some know how they do it, whether you call it your differentiating value proposition or your proprietary process or your USP. But very, very few people or organizations know why they do what they do. And by why, I don't mean to make a profit. That's a result. It's always a result. By why, I mean what's your purpose? What's your cause? What's your belief? Why does your organization exist? Why do you get out of bed in the morning? And why should anyone care? Well, as a result, the way we think, the way we act, the way we communicate is from the outside in. It's obvious. We go from the clearest thing to the fuzziest thing. But the inspired leaders and the inspired organizations, regardless of their size, regardless of their industry, all think, act, and communicate from the inside out. Let me give you an example. I use Apple because they're easy to understand and everybody gets it. If Apple were like everyone else, a marketing message from them might sound like this. We make great computers. They're beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. Want to buy one? Meh. And that's how most of us communicate. That's how most marketing is done, that's how most sales is done, and that's how most of us communicate interpersonally. We say what we do, we say how we're different or how we're better, and we expect some sort of behavior, a purchase, a vote, something like that. Here's our new law firm. We have the best lawyers with the biggest clients. We have, we always perform for our clients, do business with us. Here's our new car. It gets great gas mileage. It has, leather seats. Buy our car. But it's uninspiring. Here's how Apple actually communicates. Everything we do, we believe in challenging the status quo. We believe in thinking differently. The way we challenge the status quo is by making our products beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. We just happen to make great computers. Want to buy one? Totally different, right? You're ready to buy a computer from me. All I did was reverse the order of the information. What it proves to us is that people don't buy what you do, people buy why you do it. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it.
Yes, I think that's a great illustration of why it's important to start with purpose. Obviously, Simon's a pretty charismatic guy, but he makes a really good point. And I think if you focus on your purpose and your why and get very clear on that, it then makes it very easy for you to justify how you run your organization and how you approach solving the problem that you've set out to actually solve. So just to give you an example of some purposes, so Tesla, they exist to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy. Nike are all about bringing inspiration, innovation to every athlete in the world. And they believe if you have a body, then you're an athlete. And at Canva, we exist to empower the world to design. So I want you guys to take a moment to write in your workbook, try to refine down a really clear and actionable purpose, and try and really establish what it is your organization is trying to do and what problem you're trying to solve. And so just to flip back over here to the workbook, there should be a page here. And this is really all about how you want your audience to understand you, and this is something that you can build your entire organization around. All right. So the next part of our brand strategy or positioning is establishing some values. And they're a little bit different to your purpose. Your values are really integral for people to understand what you actually stand for, what your core beliefs are. At Canva, we have 6 values. So we have empower others, be a good human, make complex things simple, be a force for good, set crazy big goals and make them happen, and pursue excellence. And these are not just about communicating to the external world as much as they are to our internal stakeholders and our staff. All of our teams have to align on these values. If we're working on projects and we can't really justify a project to one of these values, then we really do have to reconsider whether this is the right approach. And this really does help people understand what's important to us and what we really value as a company. So they really guide your culture. That's what your values are really about. So there's a space in the workbook here to start to establish your values for your company or organization. And obviously, it's a little hard to know exactly what sorts of businesses you will have, but I'm sure there's probably a huge breadth of different company types and organizations and ideas that you guys are working on. So it might be helpful to bring in a mentor or a friend to help you to establish these. You could do things like word maps and try and figure out what sorts of values align with your purpose. So there's a space there for 3 to get you started, and you can feel free to start to fill that out now. All right, so the next ingredient for our brand positioning or strategy is personality. And this one might seem a little strange for an organization, but what this is really about, it's really about thinking of your brand as if it's a person. And we all have lots of friends with different personality types. We might have friends that are very practical and serious, the type of friend you might go to for advice. We have other friends that are really fun and charismatic. Maybe they occupy a whole different spectrum of the personality. But one thing to remember is that if you try to please everyone, you'll end up pleasing nobody. So it's actually much better to try and occupy one area of a spectrum and understand who you are. People really like to be around other people who are sure of themselves and they understand who they are. So that's what your personality is all about. You can think of it a little bit like this. So your brand core is the unchanging aspect of your brand. So this is really what your purpose is, what you believe in, and what your personality is. And this is unchanging. This is consistent. And this is what people can come to expect from you. Then you have something called your brand identity. And this is really about how you express yourself. So, how do you interact with customers? How do you speak? How do you dress? This can change with culture and with time. And this is something that does evolve and move with the speed of culture as things change and become different. So there's a little exercise in the workbook here that might help you get started with your brand personality. So this is just a simple exercise to help plot your brand traits on a spectrum. So you can kind of move these sliders around to get a feel for what part of the brand personality spectrum you might occupy. Obviously, it's not comprehensive, but it's a good starting point. There's another little useful tool here, which is called the brand Archetypes. So these were invented by a famous philosopher, Carl Jung, over decades of research. And they were actually adopted by the marketing and advertising industry to sort of help brands express themselves. But the idea here is that you would start somewhere in the middle and you'd sort of move your way out. So if you have maybe a non-profit organization that is empowering a certain group of people, maybe your goal is to provide structure. And then it might make sense that your product is actually a service. Therefore, the caregiver is a good fit for your brand archetype. And of course, brands can occupy multiple spaces on this archetype as well. It's not just a one-size-fits-all. But just to give you an example here, for us, a good fit for us is the creator. So we see potential everywhere and uncover originality with a liberated imagination. And we share this archetype with companies like Lego, Apple, and Adobe. So for some others here, Nike, they're a really good fit for the hero archetype. And of course, Patagonia, the explorer archetype. They're all about exploring the unknown. So we're going to have a quick look at what the style guide involves and what this is all about. As I said, we're going to walk away with a style guide that you can use for your business today. So as I mentioned before, it is a document that contains all of your brand assets and things that you need to go away and create marketing materials or to maybe give to your team to keep everything consistent and on brand. It's really all about having a single place or a single source of truth for everything that represents your brand. We also have, for those of you who are in nonprofits and maybe a part of our nonprofit program, you'll actually have access to Canva Pro, which includes our brand kit, which is a really great place to keep all of your brand assets so you can apply them to your different designs later on. So you can check that out on the homepage. There's a brand kit link on the left in the sidebar, and that's a place for you to store things like logos and other graphic devices that you might use, fonts and different color palettes, and you can store all that sort of stuff for different campaigns. It's a very comprehensive and useful tool. All right, so before we get into some design tips, we need to cover off one other aspect of your business, which is obviously the name. I'm sure most of you already have a name for your company already. If you don't, then I've got some useful tips here that might help you. And these are pretty universal. So there is a bit of a checklist, and funnily enough, most people check the first three, but they sort of don't check the last one. Of course, you want a name that is memorable, purposeful, appropriate, but most of all, you want it to be available. And that means checking things like domain names, social media handles. If you've in every country, you usually have a business register, which you need to check for availability as well. Here in Australia, we have ASIC, which is a government registration for business names. What you're really trying to avoid here is obviously getting a cease and desist letter in the mail from a lawyer, which has happened to me actually with some very old business that I started. So make sure you're checking availability. It's very important. The next bit of advice here is names really fit into three main categories. So you can have names that are descriptive, like Whole Foods. It says exactly what your business does and connects directly to your purpose. Emotive names, as Amazon's a good example. A to Z, it's everything in the jungle. It's a little bit more, nebulous in nature. And then you have Google, which is a completely invented name. So that can also be a really great way to go. Obviously, you're going to have much less issue with availability if you pick something that's completely made up. And there's lots of great strategies for helping you figure out a good name. We're not going to have time, or we're not going to go through much of that today, but you can certainly brainstorm names. We have some really great brainstorm templates in Canva you can use to do things like word maps and things of that nature. Okay, so we're going to jump into some design principles now. So we're going to look at some color and color theory. This is one of my favorite topics and a little bit more than meets the eye. So to get started with color, so this is the goal here. We're going to actually make a really simple color palette with a primary color and 3 secondary colors. And I'll show you how to put that together in Canva now. So before we get into that, we need to have a look at the color wheel. So hopefully a lot of you have seen this before in primary school or high school, but it's always good to do a bit of a refresh. So the color wheel is made up of primary colors, which mix into secondary colors, which mix into tertiary colors, which make up the 12 colors of the color wheel. Inside the editor in Canva, we have a color picker, which helps you add tint and shade and hue to any color. You can drag a little slider around and pick your colors that way. And then it gets a little bit more complicated here. So we get into different harmonies, and they have pretty funky names like complementary, monochromatic, analogous, and triadic. And what these are all about is to help you figure out which colors work well together. So rather than picking colors at random, if you use one of these pre-established harmonies, you're going to be much more likely going to find a color palette that works really well. So I've got a little game here now that I'm going to play, and obviously it's a little hard to get feedback from you all, so I might ask Enza if she's there to call out any answers, but I'm wondering if anyone can tell me what brand this is.
That was an easy one. It looks like Summer got in first and said Google. A few people have said Google. Some people have said United Colors or Benetton.
Oh, wow. There you go. Absolutely, it's Google. Let's try this one. I can see some
so there's been, it looks like Coca-Cola, Netflix.
Yeah. It actually could be Netflix, but this one is actually Coca-Cola. And I've got one more for you here.
There's a flood of people writing Instagram here.
It's interesting. This seems to be the easiest one. But what I love about this exercise, it shows you that you don't even need to see a logo or a piece of typography or anything. You just literally see some colors and you already know immediately what brand that is. That's how strong the association with color is. And even with the Instagram example here, it's not even really a color, it's actually a gradient. But it's something they've owned and it's become so synonymous with their brand, instantly recognizable. So it's a really great opportunity for you to own an asset that people can recognize immediately. A little bit more on the subtext for color, or I guess meaning behind. Colors do have some kind of inherent meaning based on different cultures. So this is certainly not the same all around the world. It's not universal, but in a lot of Western cultures, a lot of these associations make sense. So, for example, you'll see a lot of insurance companies and banks and professional services using blue because it's dependable and it's really good for security and professionalism. You'll see a lot of pharmaceutical companies, even cosmetic companies, using white because they love the cleanliness and sterility of white. And then if you go to the other side, obviously red and yellow, we think of food brands using those quite a lot as well. One that comes to mind is McDonald's because it's exciting, it's hunger, it's happiness, it's ketchup and mustard as well. But have a think about what your color choice is saying about your company, because there is going to be some, inherent meaning behind that color already. But yeah, it's obviously going to change depending on the culture or the country or the part of the world that you're in. Another fun exercise when you're trying to establish a color palette is to try and plot your competitors on a spectrum. On the color wheel. So you don't have to go as crazy as this, but what you might do here is pick your maybe top 3, 4, 5 competitors and just try and figure out where they sit on that color wheel, because it might all of a sudden help you understand a gap where you can own part of the color wheel. So for example, in my music streaming brand Soundscaper, I probably wouldn't want to choose Well, green, right? Because that's Spotify, and maybe even orange because that's SoundCloud. So going over for blue seems like a pretty safe choice. Little chance people are going to confuse me with my competitors. So it's also a really great exercise to try. Just a little bit more here on color and usability. I think it's really important to talk about accessibility when we talk about color. Sometimes this is an afterthought for a lot of companies, but if you think about it early, it's really going to help you scale when you grow. Really, you want to have colors that are accessible by people who have either vision impairment or other sorts of vision problems. And what that means is finding colors that are high contrast are always going to be much more accessible. So you can see here in the bottom example, the colors are pretty close together. It's a little hard to read, even though maybe it seems really unique and it looks cool. Think about accessibility for sure. So I'm just going to show you a quick demo now of a really great resource we have to help you choose a color palette. If you go to canva.com/colors, spelt the American way, we have a few resources here to help you choose color palettes. So the first one is the color palette generator. This is really cool for taking colors from an image that you have. So maybe you've got a really great mood board with some really nice imagery and you want to take the colors from that photo and use it for your brand. Well, this is what this is all about. So I won't upload one right now, but you can see here, it's very simple to upload a photo and the algorithm will extract colors from it so you can use it in your color palette. So you can copy your codes here and bring them over to your design. Another really great tool here is the color wheel. So we spoke a little bit about the different harmonies for color. So the relationship that you can have with color to help them really work well together. So you can see here we've got currently set to complementary. If I wanted to choose something like monochromatic, analogous, or triadic, I might try a triadic color palette here. You can see on the color wheel, we actually get 3 points that appear, which automatically update based on my first point. So I might choose a color palette somewhere around here. And you can see I've got my 3 triadic colors. And I can also adjust the tint or shade here. I'm going to make it a little darker. Okay, great. And then down the bottom here, you have something called a hex code. So this is a 6-digit code which computers use to read color in something called the RGB color spectrum. So now that I've got that one color, I've got this purple color, I'm going to come back over to my design. So we'll come down to color palette. And for you to update this color palette, all you need to do is click on the gray square and you'll see there's a little color tile up on the toolbar here. And you can paste, so Command V here, you can paste in your hex code and that's going to give you your color. So you can just repeat that and bring all your colors over. So we're going to move on to typography or fonts now, which is another one of my favorite topics. And I guess quite a lot to uncover here to help establish some really great typography for your brand. These are kind of the 2 very most common categories of typography. And just to start with serifs. Serif fonts have little feet, if you like, and they're sort of little decorative flourishes on the ends of the characters, and they really help with guiding your eye across the page. So they actually come from the days of traditional print, and it's all about, they have a very classic feel, and it's very good for reading large blocks of type, as the little serifs do help with legibility, especially when you're looking at much smaller type. Whereas sans is essentially French for without. And these fonts were actually invented with the age of the digital screen. Digital screens used to be very low resolution and the little serifs didn't render properly. Obviously, screens are much better now, but there was a need for a much cleaner, simpler style of type, which is sans serif. And they have an inherent kind of clean, modern, almost futuristic feel to them. There is one more category here that we need to talk about, which is display fonts. Display fonts are best way to think about them is they have a lot of personality. So you want to use them in small doses. They're very good for maybe big headlines, for a logo as well, but you would never really use a display font for a large block of text or type because they're usually not very legible or easy to read. So for that, you might want to use a serif or a sans serif or something that's a lot more legible. Got another short game for you. This is always fun. So what we're seeing here is a logo or a business name where the type has been replaced with the font name. So can any of you guess what brands we've got here? Hopefully you can all get the first one.
Yep, so the first one already has been guessed.
Okay.
Maybe if we move along to the second tile.
Yeah.
So onto
Perhaps
the right.
I'll make it a little bit easier for some of you.
Yep, it looks like everyone is guessing them all.
Okay, fantastic. So yes, we've got Instagram, Nike, Airbnb, Adobe, Twitter, and Spotify. And you can see the respective font choices that they've used. Some of them have modified them slightly, but they're all based off publicly available fonts. Thanks for that. We've got just a short video here from James again, talking about typography and how it can be used to help communicate your brand.
Finding the right typeface comes back to understanding what you want to communicate, who you are, and why you're communicating in this way. You can be big and loud and proud and brash, but if you are a minimal mid-century furniture company, that probably won't feel right for you. Typography is the opportunity to connect the dots between who you are and how you articulate that out into the world. So I think of it as another opportunity, like the logo and the identity and the color system, to express a little bit of your personality, which will come to life through the language, but also through the typeface choice you make.
Yeah, so I think typography is a really great opportunity to help reinforce the personality of your brand. So we've already covered off why personality is really important. And once you've established what your personality is, this is a really great way to start to connect that strategy with a visual element of your brand. So you can tell here by looking at some of these, they have a very specific feel or subtext. So you can see here, there's one here called Cocktail Hour. It's a very script kind of handwritten font. It might be great for something for a brand that wants to have a little bit more of a human feel, organic, handmade feel. Whereas something that's a little bit more bold might be good for a company that's maybe the caregiver or a different personality spectrum on the archetype spectrum. Something else to remember here is that the human brain actually interprets images about 50,000 times faster than words. So before you've even read the logo or the piece of text, your brain's already thinking about, what is this message saying? What kind of feel am I getting from the words on the page? So it really is an opportunity to make sure you're reinforcing your message with your typography choice. I know I'd rather receive the note on the left compared to the one on the right. It really does make quite a difference depending on your choice. It can change the message completely. So I've got a little demo to show you how to get started with font pairing in Canva. If you don't want to pair your own, we have a huge team of designers who have already gone ahead and created some really great font pairs. So if we come back to our brand book here, we have a typography section. The easiest way to add type to your page here, you can just press the T key on the keyboard, and that'll add a block of text. And then you can then use the toolbar up the top here to search our font library. There's literally thousands of fonts in there. Many of them are free. For those of you who have the Canva Pro account, if you're a part of a nonprofit, then you'll get access to all of the premium Pro fonts as well. And you can also search in here for different keywords, so feelings, if you like. So if you've established that your brand is quite playful, well, then try writing playful. Only got one there, but maybe we could do modern. And you're going to find a whole ton of different choices. Another really great way to get started with font pairs is to use the text button in the object panel on the left here. So these are pre-made section templates, if you like, for typography. Some of them have some really funky text effects as well. I'm just going to create a new page here so we can get an idea of how these work. So let's go down to, maybe we'll actually search for something here like invite. So I'll add this one in here. And you can see this is a composition for typography that I can use to start to build out maybe an invitation. I could obviously update the information here and turn it into a business card or something. But you've got a couple of different font pairs. So this one is using Bebas New in conjunction with Montserrat Classic. So these are all designed to work really, really well together. Really worth exploring that text library if you want to get started with some good font pairs and compositions. So I've got a few more helpful hints here if you want to get started choosing your own font pairs yourself. One is to stick with one family. So what that means is quite often you'll notice many fonts come in multiple weights or thicknesses. So you could very easily choose something like we have Aileron here. We could choose Aileron Heavy for our headlines. We could use Aileron Thin for our sub-headlines, and then we could use Aileron Regular for our body copy. All one typeface, but you're getting enough variation there to use it quite flexibly across, a piece of communication. Another helpful tip is to use something called a superfamily. What is a superfamily? Well, this is when a type designer will actually create a set of fonts that cross multiple font classifications. So you might have, if for example, here we have Noto Sans and Noto Serif and Noto Sans Black. So two different typefaces, a couple of different weights. They're designed to work really, really well together, but they're actually in different categories. You can't go wrong if you use a superfamily. The type designer's kind of done all the work for you and can be a really, really good option. If we want to get a little bit more wild with our font choices, another good tip here is to remember that opposites attract. So for the designers in the audience, maybe some of you have tried pairing fonts together, maybe two different sans serif fonts, and you put them on the page and they just don't look good together. They seem to be sort of conflicting. And that's because they're too similar. Usually, fonts that are almost exactly the same as each other tend to compete or fight with each other on the page. So if you can find two fonts that are quite drastically different, you're more likely to get a pleasing result. So that could be choosing font pairs that may be short with tall, a simple or a decorative font work really well together. And of course, sans and serif fonts work really well together in pairs. So I think the best font choices are really the ones where the reader doesn't notice the font at all. They just notice the message. That's simple as that. It's really about reinforcing what your message and meaning behind your brand is all about. So when you're picking your fonts for your style guide, I would recommend picking one or two. And you can think about how you might apply them to a piece of communication. In this instance, we've got a poster. So we've got some type for the word mark of the logo, for the headlines, and also for the body copy. So if you assign your fonts, give them different roles within your designs, then you're going to ensure there's a consistent look and it becomes something that people recognize. If you're creating a presentation, you're doing slides, it's really worth establishing your font roles beforehand so you can keep all of your type consistent. So establish exactly what size type you want to use and what fonts you want to use on a slide like this, and then you can start to apply it to all of your slides. All right, we're going to jump into imagery next. So this is another reasonably big topic, but we have quite a lot of really great options in Canva to help you get started with this. And what we're really talking about here is two things. We're talking about illustration and photography. So when would you use one over the other? Well, I think a lot of brands will use both, but there's definitely a good reason to use one over the other. We're going to hear from Jason Little now. He's a creative director at an agency here in Sydney. We'll see what he has to say.
I guess the most interesting thing about illustration is it doesn't need to be based on reality. So you can have this weird idea that you would never be able to do in photography because it would involve flying to the moon and having a setup there, or you can illustrate that, and that means for tech products, new products, startups, a lot of the time they're going, what do I need in my imagery? I need to communicate an idea, but yet the product isn't finished yet, or we don't have an audience participating with it yet, so you can use illustration as a really good foundation to communicate the ideas behind your product or service.
Yeah, so I think with illustration, obviously there's a really great opportunity for those of you who maybe have a startup and you maybe don't have a product yet, or you haven't launched your business in a market yet. It's a really great chance for you to communicate an idea with something like illustration. In this instance here, we've got some imagery which I've applied a similar treatment to, so that there's a consistent look. This is another really easy thing you can do in Canva. So I'll just show you how I've done this. So on your imagery page here, you've got a space to add a few images. Of course, you can add as many as you need, but just to get started searching for photos within Canva, we can use the photos button over here on the left and search for whatever we need. So I'm going to choose music. And I'm going to grab a few different images here. Okay, so you can see these images don't really have the same style. So if I really wanted to establish, I guess, some kind of treatment for these images so I can keep them consistent, a good solution here is to use filters. So filters are just like you might use in Instagram or other photo editing software, and it just allows you to add a treatment over the top of your image. So I'm going to change all of these to black and white. And so now I'm essentially establishing my image style as being always black and white. So it's really easy to do. Also, just another little tip here for searching for images. We have literally millions of images, but we also recently connected with Pexels and Pixabay. So they have a huge image library that you can access from the More tab in the object panel. So I'm going to add pixels in here. What you might find is some of the images in the Pexels and Pixabay library are a little bit better curated. The communities there are obviously all professional photographers. Sometimes you might find exactly what you need by searching for one of those libraries separately. So the other part is graphic devices. So this might be your illustration or your other graphic elements that you might want to use in your branding to, again, help with brand recognition. So you can find these by going to, I'm going to come to the next page here, and I'm going to go to Elements over on the left. In the Elements tab, you can find lots of different ingredients that you might use for your design, including just millions of illustrations, just basic shapes, icons, there's even charts, there's animated stickers, there's so many different things in here. So please explore and see what you can find. But if you scroll down here, we do have these really great illustration sets as well. So if you're looking for illustrations that all match, this is a really great place to start. So a lot of our design contributors have created sets of illustrations that are made to work really well together. And with a lot of these, I might grab a few of these ones here. These are designed to work seamlessly together. They obviously have the same sort of style. You can also update the color up here in the toolbar to match your color palette, which you've established earlier. And these might be used for something like your social media marketing. Maybe you create a template where you use your illustration around the outside of your template, or perhaps it's some other design element that you want to use consistently across all of your marketing. Okay, so we're almost done with all of the different elements we need for our brand design and our style guide. We've created a color palette. We've chosen some typography. We've had a look at imagery and creating an image style. The last thing we're missing here is the logo, right? So we're going to have a quick look at that next. I think we have another short video from James here to kick us off.
The logo will always be one of the most important parts of your brand. It clarifies and codifies everything you stand for, everything you want to be, and everything you want to communicate. It's about connecting with your audience immediately, clearly, and confidently. And I think the danger in creating an identity which is over-complex is that you can alienate a lot of people. So my advice would always be to err on the side of clarity and simplicity, and you can use other parts of your brand and experience to communicate other facets of who you are and what you want to say.
All right, so yeah, I think what James is getting at there is quite often when we're designing a logo, it's tempting to try and cram as much meaning and complexity into that logo as possible. And I think sometimes that's not the right way to go. You know, you're much better off choosing a very simple idea or communicating one aspect of your brand and then using the other parts of your brand to communicate other facets. So you can see some of the most iconic logos in the world are usually very, very simple. So we have three kind of types here. There's certainly a few more than this, but these are the three main categories of logo. So we have a symbol, a word mark, or we have both combined together. In case you're wondering why the FedEx logo is also a symbol, there's actually a little hidden arrow between the E and the X, which designers love. And FedEx use that in their marketing all the time, that hidden arrow. So Nike, I've spoken about them a little bit today, but a lot of people don't realize that they think it's just an abstract symbol, but it's actually based off Nike, the winged goddess of victory. It's a Greek mythological character, and it's an abstracted wing. So for my brand here, Soundscaper, I created this using a template which I've modified. So I'm going to show you how to do that very quickly now. So we can add it to our brand style guide. So from your homepage here, you can choose logo. You can search for a logo to get started. This will bring up a document type designed to create a logo and give you access to hundreds of different logo templates. So you can see here, there's lots in here. I'm going to scroll down and choose one of these. I might go for this one today. So this is a really great place to get started. Let's do... And what I might also consider here is creating another version of my logo for reverse context. So sometimes you might need to put your logo on a black background. Sometimes you might need to put it on a white background. So you need sometimes two different versions of your logo. I'm actually just going to duplicate this page here, and I'll make my page black. And then we'll change the color of this text. Okay, so this might be my new two different logo types. Now, if you're using Canva Pro, it makes it very easy for you to download the logo with a transparent background. This is really useful for those of you who have ever put a logo on top of an image, for example. You'll know it's important to have that transparent background so you can still see the image behind the logo. So PNG, download with transparent background. I'm going to download both pages here and then go ahead. All right. And for me right now, I'm actually just going to highlight this and copy my logo, come back to my style guide workbook here, and I'm going to get rid of this part, put in my logo here. All right. So lots of different ways for you to get started with logo design there. Always good to start with a template, and then you can completely customize it however you need. And all of those templates are completely free to use. There's no sort of trademark or copyright issues if you want to use them and modify them. There's absolutely no problem. All right, so I've got one last tip here before we wrap up today and go into some Q&A, and that's just working with templates. So we've seen how to use logo templates. We've seen some type font pairing templates as well. But if you do get into creating some more marketing materials like pitch decks, and later in the week we're going to hear a lot more about that. Something that's really helpful is that all of our templates have very instructive placeholder text. So when you open something like this, for example, this is a pitch deck with a problem statement. You've actually got some very clear explanation for what you should be including in your copy, in your pitch deck. So a lot of people who are writing a business plan for the first time and then are a little unsure of what they need to include in it, these templates are really, really great at help guiding you through that process. So yeah, make sure you're checking that out when you're creating designs. Have a look at the instructive placeholder text to help you tailor your content for that specific document type. All right, so that pretty much wraps it up. I just want to leave you with another resource here. So Design School is our learning hub or learning platform, and we've got lots of really great resources for all sorts of different design specialties. So we've just recently launched a course on personal branding with Talea Waller. But you can learn a lot more about the things that I've spoken about today with branding, graphic design, presentations, social media marketing. There's all sorts of really great stuff on there. So please check that out. And just to finish up here, I'm really privileged and happy for you guys to join in today. We really are on a mission here to try and empower the world for good and to help people do really great things with their businesses and their initiatives. And we really feel like we're about 1% of the way there. So yeah, I just want to say a huge thank you to all of you for joining. And I hope you enjoyed the workshop and you got something out of the content today. And if you've got any questions, we're going to stick around for a moment to do some Q&A. So hopefully Enza has got some questions for me.
I do. I have a few that have come through in the chat throughout your presentation. So I've just flagged them, and we might sort of go back to the beginning of your presentation when you started to talk about branding and the brand elements like typography and choosing a brand archetype and all that sort of stuff. Yep. So the first question is from Nina. And her question is, do you always want to use two different fonts for headline and typography, or can it be the same?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think it's always a good idea to have some kind of variation in your typography to help communicate, I guess, different situations. So typically with headlines, obviously, a headline is something that's it's the biggest piece of type on any piece of communication. So typically it's going to be louder and bolder and have a lot more personality. So you should consider using something like that that's a bit more attention grabbing for your headline. Whereas anything else, your subheadlines and your body copy is typically going to be a lot more words that people have to read. And you obviously you want to empower your reader. So you don't want to use a font that's a little bit hard, that's going to make more work for them to read. You want to make sure that it's really legible and easy for them to read if they have to read a lot of text. So that's kind of the trade-off there. I think you would use something bold or maybe a display font for your short copy, but something more practical for your longer form copy. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think it does. I think when you're talking about typography, what's really important to remember is the contrast between two typefaces, similar to what you had said before about potentially using a serif and a sans serif. I think the contrast creates a really nice dynamic piece in the design. So yeah, I'd be keeping that in mind. We had a few font questions, so I hope that addresses kind of a bunch of them that we did have. Nina also asked another question about brand archetypes. I thought this one was interesting. She wrote, can you be 50% on an archetype? So for example, like you're 50% a magician and 50% sage. Or do you have to be 100% one archetype? What do you think, Nick?
Yeah, that's a great point. No, you can absolutely occupy multiple archetypes. I think sometimes brands will actually choose two archetypes depending on their which audience they're communicating with. They might have multiple stakeholders. So, for example, if you have a nonprofit and you're pitching for funding to investors, you might use a completely different tone of voice, a different archetype compared to when you're talking to your users or your main audience. So yeah, you can definitely occupy multiple parts of that archetype spectrum. It just depends, obviously who you're talking to, and yeah, I think that's that's really what it's all about. The archetypes help inform your tone of voice and the way you communicate. So it might inform your vocabulary, the sorts of words you might use when you're writing a piece of communication.
Yeah, I think what's important to remember with archetypes is they're a tool used that isn't going to define you forever. I think it's just something that you should use as a tool to help you make brand decisions and don't necessarily feel restricted by them. They should always be felt like they're helping rather than hindering you. So hopefully that helps. And if you feel like it's going to help doing 50-50, go for it.
We've been talking a lot about creating this brand style guide and filling it with some visual assets, but that initial positioning and strategy part is really your framework. It's to help you filter design decisions through. So if you get stuck and you're not quite sure whether the choice you're making is the right choice, you can go back to that document and you can validate by reading what sort of archetype, what sort of personality you want your brand to sound like.
How do you come up with a fresh idea of a new brand? Which is a very tricky question.
Coming up with a fresh idea for a new brand, hey? Yeah, that's a good question. I think, look, it always starts with market research. I think for a lot of people, for a lot of other people, it might just come naturally. Maybe you've identified a need out there in the world, and you've got a crazy passion to go and solve a problem. That's really where it comes from. I don't think I can really answer that definitively. Really, I think it's different for everybody. Yeah. What do you think, Enzo?
I agree. I think there's probably not a specific process that you can follow to get a great brand at the end. But I think the workbook that Nick has kind of shared with us today, it holds your hand to get to that, hopefully, at the end of it. So if you start off with thinking about your purpose, doing your research, creating a mood board, choosing some images, choosing some keywords, working out what your values are, all of those things are ingredients that will help you to hopefully build a great brand. So I think this workbook is definitely an introduction and it's definitely a start to it. So hopefully that helps. We have another question from an anonymous attendee, which is it possible to design your own illustrations in Canva?
Yeah, that's a good question. So Canva is a pretty powerful tool for composition. In terms of designing or illustrating your own things in the same way you might, put pen to paper. There is no drawing input yet with Canva. I probably can't speak too much about the future features for our products, but I can certainly let you know that it's something that we are working on. But that's probably all I can say on that. But if you are creating maybe your own digital artwork in something like a vector program, something like Illustrator, you can absolutely export your artwork from Illustrator as an SVG file, which is a type of vector file, and then you can import that straight into Canva. You'll be able to then manipulate that, in terms of the color and scale and composition. So that's probably the best answer I can give you there. For creating your own illustrations, quite often you need to use a specific program designed for that purpose for illustration.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. There is a couple of questions that is about branding and the naming of a brand. What do you think of using a person's name as a brand?
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good question, an interesting one, because there are certain industries that sort of tend to use names for brands, and one that comes to mind is the legal profession. You always have the surnames of the partners that established that practice. But beyond that, I think using a name can be helpful if you feel that a lot of the goodwill in the brand is associated with your name or the name of the person. The one drawback, though, is if it's your name and you ever need to relinquish control or step back out of that business, and it's your name that's associated with that brand, it can be a little hard for your audience to understand why you're not front and center for that brand. So, if you're happy being if you're happy being in the limelight all the time and you're at the forefront of that brand all the time, maybe it makes sense. Otherwise, it might not. There is a course on Design School at the moment for personal branding, and it's kind of answers a lot of these questions. I recommend you check it out with Talaya Waller. She's an amazing expert and talks quite a lot about this.
Thanks for that. I think that's a good tip, Nick. Just on that, there's kind of like a boundary question, which is, what do you think of having your picture or your graphic in your logo as a picture of the person? I think potentially on that note, I would probably suggest thinking about how your logo reproduces. So logos have to work at really big scale, so on the size of an airplane, and then also they'd have to work really, really small. So potentially if you think about like a logo on a pen as part of merchandise. So I think you would probably have to consider how that would work, and potentially it would need to be like a stylized image of a face, perhaps. Do you have any more on that, Nick?
No, I think, that's exactly right. Like, I mean, we only just touched on a very sort of simple introduction to a lot of this stuff today, but you absolutely should be pressure testing your logo design. So that would mean trying to experience the logo very small or very large to see how it looks. And before we mentioned erring on the side of simplicity with your logo, I think that's going to help with that scalability. So if you're using a face or something really detailed, think about how you can graphically reduce that idea to something much more simple. You're going to get a much better result that way.
There's another question just related to imagery this time. So when it comes to using images in the Canva library, so in Pexels or Pixabay, are there any copyright restrictions when you're using these images to promote a brand?
Yeah, it's a good question. So when you're searching the library, you'll see some images are free and some of them are pro or paid. So if you're using Canva Pro, then you'll get access to all of the pro or paid images. And that includes a license for you to use that image. And you can use that obviously unlimited for your business. So you'll see there's sort of different licensing restrictions when you're searching for images. Also, there's a little tick box within the image search where you can filter out the pro images. You can just search for free ones if you don't want to use anything that you have to pay for. That's pretty much it. There's a slight different licensing structure for some of the Pexels and Pixabay images. When you go to use one of those images, you'll see the specific licensing restrictions.
Cool, thank you. There is a great question from Isabel that is, I think rebranding is harder than branding. Any tips on how to go about doing that?
Yeah, it really is, isn't it? And I think the reason it's quite hard is because when you've already established a brand, there's a certain amount. You have to imagine a brand is really a container or a vehicle. It doesn't have any inherent meaning when you first create it, but as you start to use it and as people start to see it out in the world, they put meaning into it. It starts to grow and build. People have associations and experiences with that brand, and that's called goodwill. So you really want to make sure you're not abandoning all that goodwill that you've built up over the course of the brand by redesigning a new brand that looks completely different. So there is always that tension between you want to maybe your goal is to make your brand look more modern or appeal to a different market. It's very hard to sometimes still appeal to your old market and still be recognizable, but appeal to a new market at the same time. I think this is when working with a professional brand consultant can really help. They really understand how to, build on those connections. That's probably the best advice I can say. It is very difficult for sure.
it is difficult. I think, like you said, you don't want to sort of lose all of that goodwill that you have built up. There has been kind of a follow-up question to that from someone else, which is funnily quite similar. When it comes to logo designing, when do you think it's suitable for a brand to change their logo? So, for example, do you think it's right to do after 10 years in existence or more?
Yeah. Well, I think there was a slide that I left out today, but it's sometimes fun to go back and look at some of the world's biggest brands and the way that their logos have evolved. I think Google is a good one. So they started in the 90s with a really kind of ugly logo, which was a serif typeface with a drop shadow, and it had kind of like a bubble effect on it. And they've slowly refined it and made it simpler over time. But the modern logo still looks like their original logo. You can still tell there's a clear progression. So I think, look, there's no right or wrong answer to this. If you have a new startup and you just need a logo so you can go out and pitch for funding, or you can go out and actually start interacting with the world, then it doesn't really matter. Just create something to get you going. And then once you have cash flow and you have a customer base, you might want to consider going back and doing some of those other really important facets of your brand, using a brand consultant even, if you're quite a big company.
Now, I think it's probably also really quite important to remember that at the beginning of the presentation, we sort of emphasized that a brand is more than just a logo. So you could change your logo. And yes, that is part of your brand, but it is only a small part of it. And even though it probably seems like the part that most people will recognize, there are a whole bunch of other things, particularly in that workbook, that will help identify your brand. So if you are looking at changing just a logo visually, I think that's one thing. But I think where it can go a little bit hairy is if you try to change too many of your core elements that make your brand, and then your brand just kind of doesn't really feel like you anymore. So unless there's a real reason that you're doing that, I'd probably reconsider. But yeah, so Nick, great presentation. I think that's probably answered most questions that we've received. So I think we might wrap it up and leave it there.
Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you guys get on to some of the other sessions that we have this week. We've got an action-packed week with lots of really great presenters and experts talking about all sorts of different topics to do with, amplifying your impact and for nonprofits all over the world. And yeah, it's been awesome to bring this workshop to you from Australia, wherever you're watching. And thanks so much for tuning in.